mamita, yo no lo puedo evitar. Cuando Juanica y Chan Chan en el mar servían arena, como sacudía el jibe, a Chan Chan le daba pena.
Hola clase, hoy vamos a discutir Cuba. So I'm really excited about doing this lesson with you today. One of the things that I've loved about Spanish is that it has exposed me to so many different cultures. But one of the amazing things about travel is that you're able to see things with your own eyes. And I always had a negative perception of Cuba. Not per se for any particular reason, but I think when I was in high school, when they talked about the Bay of Pig invasion, they talked about the terrible dictator, they talked about communism, it didn't give you necessarily a really great overview of what this country is all about, and also the embargo. So we haven't been able to trade with Cuba for about 60 years, and so that's had a huge impact. And so I'm really looking forward. I probably could spend an hour to 2 hours talking about Cuba, but I promise I won't torture you. So we were just listening to Buena Vista Social Club, which is one of the most famous bands to come from Cuba and also one of the most famous in the world. Y la canción se llama Chan Chan. So, ¿cuál es la capital de Cuba? Hay tres opciones: Santiago de Cuba, Varadero y La Habana. La capital es La Habana. So, ¿cuántas millas es Cuba de los Estados Unidos? How many miles is Cuba from the United States? Hay cuatro opciones: 240, 90, 500 o 150. La respuesta es 90 millas. So it's only 90 miles from the United States, so it's just a stone throw away. So, ¿cómo se llama la ciudad estadounidense que es 90 millas de Cuba? So what is the name of the city that is closest to Cuba that's only 90 miles away? Cayo Hueso, Key Largo, Miami, or Tampa? Es Cayo Hueso. So if you guys can see, Key West, Cayo Hueso is Spanish for Key West, and it's the sister city with Havana, and it's only 90 miles away. That's one of the reasons why many Cubans, when they try to flee Havana, they try to take a raft over to Key West or to the coast of Florida. There's this rule called the wet foot, dry foot. So if you get 1 foot on American soil, within a year, the United States will grant you asylum. But keep in mind that trip across the ocean is treacherous, and there's a really, big chance that you might not survive due to numerous different reasons. The weather, your raft might not go in the direction that you need to. But you need to get 1 foot on land. So even if you can see the land and your foot hasn't landed on it yet, they could send you back to Cuba. So it's really devastating. Imagine making it all the way there and just not having your foot on land. But numerous people try to attempt it every year, sometimes successfully and not successfully. And one of the reasons we grant asylum is because they're fleeing a dictatorship. So, ¿cuál bandera es de Cuba? Which is the Cuba flag? A, B, or C? A. This is Cuba. So B is un otra isla muy cerca de Cuba. So this is Puerto Rico, and you can see there's just a differential with the colors. Y C es Costa Rica. And I talked about this earlier in the semester. ¿Cómo se llama una persona que estudia las banderas? What do you call somebody that studies flags? Vexillologist, linguist, or cartographer? Vexillologist. So the study of flags is vexillology. ¿Cómo se llama el dictador famoso? Raúl Castro, Fidel Castro, or Jorge Castro? Fidel Castro es el dictador famoso he gave up power in about 2008 to his hermano, Raúl Castro. Jorge Castro es su hijo, is his son. And Raúl isn't as nearly as strict as Fidel was. But for the last 10 years about, Raúl has been in control. So, ¿en qué año murió Fidel Castro? In what year did Fidel Castro die? 2001, 1990 o 2016? La respuesta es 2016. So Fidel died a couple of years ago, and Raul, even though he'd been in charge for a while with his brother out of the way, he is a little bit more lenient. So Fidel es una persona muy interesante. Fidel is a really interesting character. So why is Fidel Castro in the Guinness Book of World Records? Is it because he's the longest serving head of state, the longest speech, or that there were the most assassination plots against him? Vamos a ver. So, longest serving head of state, Fidel Castro was the world's third longest serving head of state. Longest speech, Castro holds the Guinness Book of Records for the longest speech ever delivered at the United Nations, so 4 hours and 29 minutes. His longest speech on record in Cuba was 7 hours and 10 minutes in 1986. So one of the things about Fidel is that he was a very good speaker and he was able to manipulate people and mesmerize people with his speeches, but could you fathom speaking for 7 hours? So I had this amazing opportunity to meet a woman who fled Cuba right after Fidel took over, and her and some girlfriends had formed a chain across this bridge that Fidel was coming because they wanted to ask him some questions. They wanted to protest against him. And Fidel had gotten out of his car and started speaking to these women. And she said by the time he was done speaking, they were so mesmerized that none of their questions that they wanted to ask, they were able to ask because it was such a gift. And so what's really interesting about Fidel is that he started a revolution with 11 people. And he basically did guerrilla warfare where he walked through the mountains, went to the smaller towns. He convinced people to join his revolution, promising him that he wouldn't become a dictator, promising him that he would change Cuba for the better. And so he was really good at convincing people to do what he wanted. And eventually he did take over the entire island of Cuba. So even though Fidel isn't necessarily known to be the greatest dictator, and he also promised not to become one. Just like anything, when you get power, things tend to change, and he became very power hungry. But he took over an entire island, starting just with 11 people. So what's not possible? So assassination plots. Castro claims he survived 634 attempts on his life, mainly masterminded by the US CIA. They involved poison pills, a toxic cigar, exploding mullets, a chemically tainted diving suit, and powder to make his beard fall out. As you could see in the picture before, his beard was always a huge part of his persona. And at some point, Fidel had to make a choice when he took over, whether to get along with the United States and become a democracy or to become communist. And at the time, Russia was communist and they were really, let's say, buttering Castro up and sending him sugar and flour and saying, look how well communism is working here. And he also saw how the United States got involved in everything. And he was like, I really don't want the United States to dictate what I do. And so he basically gave him the middle finger and became communist. And at that time, too, the United States was in Cuba. There was tons of casinos. And so he kicked everybody out. So that's one of the reasons Las Vegas was created, because everyone used to go to Havana to go to these mob-owned casinos. And once he kicked them out, they created Las Vegas. And so he saw that Americans were taking their money. So he got off on a really bad foot with the United States. So continuando, ¿cuánto dinero gana un cubano en un mes? So how much money does a Cuban earn in a month? And so this is converted into American dollars, 50, 150, 20, or 200. So an average Cuban gana $20 cada mes. So about $20 a month is what the average Cuban earns. So what can $20 get you? Spending an entire month's salary, a worker can only afford 19 hours of internet connection, also maybe 84 minutes of local calls through cell phones. So you really have to make a lot of decisions about how you'd want to spend your money. What's really fascinating about Cuban culture is that when I was there in 2013, about 1 in 15 people had a cell phone. So imagine a culture that's not connected to their phones. So people are speaking to each other, people are giving eye contact. That's one of the greatest things I loved about my experience in Cuba is that not only are they really friendly, they're really happy because they're socializing with each other. And I'll never forget my friend that was with me. She'd brought a cell phone to give to somebody that she knew. And it was such a big deal to have a cell phone that she literally dropped to her knees and started crying. So travel also puts into perspective, what we take for granted. And that's something that the reason I love to travel because it humbles me and helps me be grateful for the things I do have. So other things that you could buy for that $20 is 74 trips in a taxi. I would probably go with the 29 cervezas. The most logical probably would be 10 chickens to feed your family, powdered milk if you have small children, and so on. So to buy a two-room apartment in a building built in 1936 in central Havana, you would have to save an entire salary for 98 years. So just keep that in mind. So this would be an annual salary for different professions in Cuba. So a physician makes 1,648, and you guys can see the list of the different amounts of money people make. So how is it possible to make such little money and live in Cuba? Well, one reason is that there's ration books. So each household is given a ration book, and there's a list of family members, their dates of birth. What you're allowed to buy depends on your age and your gender. For example, milk can only be bought for children below the age of 7 or for pregnant women and the elderly. The bodega clerk also keeps a book containing the information on each local household and the list of products allowed to sell to them. A bodega clerk will know if there is or isn't a child under 7 or an elderly member of the household who needs milk. There are penalties for families not reporting any changes in the composition of the household. But listen to this. This is really exciting. You do get extra rations if it's your birthday or your wedding day. So you're allotted cake, rum, and beer. And so these are actual photos that I took. And I was in a poorer neighborhood. So every ration store is different. So if I was in a nicer neighborhood, the ration store is going to look a lot different than what this one does. So imagine though, we walk into a supermarket that has so many choices and you only make $20 a month and then you're given a ration card and then they tell you what kind of food you're eating. That's something that we don't think of that often, but I can have American food tonight, Chinese food tomorrow, Italian food the next day, Cuban food the next day. And so, we don't think about these small things. We take them for granted instead of having someone dictate what you can have every single month. So a coupon book is taken to the ration shop, right? And so you guys can see on the left-hand side, arroz is rice, granos is grains, aceite is oil, azúcar is sugar. And so the shop provides a minimum for rice, sugar, matches, and oil. Back in the day, they used to provide for cigarettes as well, but they don't do that anymore. So, ¿qué porcentaje de la población es alfabetizado? So, alfabetizado means literate. So, what percentage of the population is literate? 50, 97, 75 or 40? 97 porcentaje. So Fidel was a huge advocate for education, and that's something that he believed that everyone should have equal access to. So when he actually took over as leader of the country, Cuba was about 70% literate, and then after 8 years of Fidel leading the country, 97 porcentaje of the country was literate and still is today. In the United States, adults in the United States, it's about 50% literacy rate. And so this association, just because they're a poor island or a communist island that they would be uneducated, does not apply. And so that's something, you make assumptions about things. And so that's a really interesting fact about Cuba. So Cuba offers a free education from cradle to grave. from preschool programs to doctorates. Education is free and available to all. And this is something else that Fidel was really passionate about, that everybody have access to free education. So it is mandatory through ninth grade. After that, youngsters have the option of 3 years of a pre-university program or going to a vocational school. So if you have a general idea of what you want to do, you can start doing that after ninth grade, which really makes a lot of sense. Individuals can attend the university system and earn as many undergraduate and graduate degrees as they might have the inclination to achieve at no cost. So you can get 4 undergraduate degrees, 2 master's degrees, and pay nothing. So imagine not having to pay student loans. So that kind of makes up for the fact that you are allotted food, right? So if you don't have to pay for your education, imagine how much money that would save you. So although higher education is available and free, they do have to go through an interview and examination process to meet the university standards. So they do have really good schools, and of course they want you to be serious about it. So they're not just going to admit anybody. You do have to study, but I would think it would be totally worth it if you don't have to pay to get your education. So ELAM, which is a medical school, caters specifically to low-income students from outside Cuba. So yes, that's right. Even though it is illegal for Americans to travel to Cuba, you can go to the medical school, which is free, and it's the one of the best in the world. So doctors that come from Cuba are known to be the best in the world. Um, but what they ask is that after your 6 years of education, you return to serve their communities. And so I was really fortunate when I was in Cuba. I met a med student that was just graduating, and he was from Mexico, and he was going back to serve in his rural community. And what he told me was that, they basically train without technology, so that you need to know the body so well that you don't rely on technology. And I mean, that would come in really helpful, especially for islands in the Caribbean where you have hurricanes that come through and might wipe out the electricity. And so imagine if our doctors didn't rely on technology. Not only does this save money, especially for healthcare costs, it makes a huge impact on how the doctor treats you. And so even if you wanted to give an x-ray, you would have to fill out like 75 pages to prove why you needed to do that. But there are issues because of the embargo, right? So there's shortages that exist for drugs as common as aspirin. Expensive tests like CT scans are rarely ordered, like I said, assuming the hospital even have reliable electricity. So with that being said as well, what's really fascinating about the doctors, right, and our issues with Cuba is that because, you're supposed to serve your communities, Cuba offered their best doctors to us during Hurricane Katrina, and we refused them. Cuba offered their best doctors to us for 9/11, and we refused them because of political issues. And so this is something that always grinds my gears, is that we always put politics before people when we could help them with the best doctors in the world. So with that being said, Cuba's medical system, they produce the country's GDP per is just 1/10 of the US, and it lacks access to drugs and equipment thanks to the US trade embargo. But listen to this, life expectancy in Cuba is actually just above the United States. Why? Because they focus on preventative medicine for everyone under a national healthcare system. So you do not have to pay for your healthcare. Physicians live and work in their community. Their home is typically above the clinic. Doctors make house calls and do public health surveys in their neighborhoods, even looking for stagnant pools of water during dengue season. In short, doctors in Cuba take on an unglamorous work of public health. So imagine doctors coming to your house to take care of you. A lot of people are really resistant to go to the doctors because either they don't have the money or they're just really stubborn. So these doctors go door to door. They know their patients really well. They do their examinations there. And so this prevents illnesses that would come, which saves them money in the long run. One thing also that's really frustrating is that, so Cuba has created a vaccine for lung cancer. So lung cancer is like the #1 killer in Cuba, also in the United States. And so this vaccine that's given to them extends your life by 5 to 15 years. So of course you would want this. But of course, because we have the embargo, we refuse to work with Cuban doctors and use this medicine to help our country as well. So I really hope that someday the embargo is dropped because we all could use Imagine if you have a loved one that's dying of lung cancer and there's a vaccine out there to help with their quality of life. So it's really unfortunate in this aspect. So it's a really interesting fact about doctors. So if you're looking to become a doctor, I would definitely look in because you would not have any debt once you got out of medical school. So just kind of transitioning a little bit, Cuba is full of US cars from the 1950s. This is because there's only um, cars Cuban citizens can legally own. Only pre-1959 cars that were seized from their original owners can be privately owned and worked on. So 1959 was when the embargo from the United States was enacted, so nothing new came to Cuba. So if you go there, it's almost like flying back in time. Even the taxi cabs are cars from the 1950s, and it's really phenomenal to see. But also think of this, they are not a throwaway culture because they can't afford to be. The things that they've had are usually from the 1950s because nothing's imported or you can't afford to buy something new. It's too expensive to. So if you have a fan that breaks, you figure out how to fix it. If your car breaks down, you figure out how to fix it. And so if there's been a car in your family, it is passed down from generation to generation because the only other car that you can legally own is a government car, which could also track everything you do. So, that's not something most people would be inclined to do. So, the majority of the cars that you see in Cuba look exactly like this, which is pretty amazing. The architecture is very Great Gatsby style. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's one of the main attractions why people go to Cuba. I feel really lucky I had the opportunity to go there. Like I said, I had a really negative preconception of Cuba, and of the 21 countries I visited, it's probably my top two favorite countries because of the culture and the people. It was absolutely phenomenal. So it's really important for you to go see things with your own eyes and learn for yourself about what's going on. Because we, a lot of times in our high school classes, we're only taught what they want you to know. So going to see things for yourself is really important. So obviously too, a lot of the buildings that are really amazing that we would be renovation heaven for Americans are dilapidated because if you're only making $20 a month, you really don't have the money to upkeep these places. So these are some photos that I took when I was there. But imagine, if Americans could get their hands on these. And that's really what's kind of scary as well. Cuba is so unique in itself because it's pretty much been untouched by America since 1960. So there's no McDonald's, there's no Starbucks, there's no Tim Hortons, and it's very rare that you travel someplace that happens. And this is one of the places that happens. And so that if this opened up, what would change if Americans got their fingers on these property and the prices would go up and so on. But also you don't want the Cuban people to suffer. So um, it's an interesting conundrum. So this is one of the things I found most fascinating about Cuba, and I really can't wait till I go back someday. In most parts of the world, artists struggle to make a living. But in Cuba, they're part of the wealthiest 1% of the population. So it doesn't matter what street corner you go down, you find art everywhere. So most of the paintings for sale to tourists are $100 or less. So selling just one a month, a painter makes more than double the average Cuban who earns only $19 a month. So we talked about that. So if you work for the government, you get $20 a month. If you're an artist and you sell just one painting for $100, you're doing really well. So of course, the majority of the population, they want to be artists because it's an easy way to make money. And so there's art everywhere. People are inspired to become artists. People are encouraged to be artists. And so that's a really unique environment to be part of. And like I said, you can find it anywhere. The thing that's challenging for a lot of Cuban artists is that it's really hard to get anything imported to Cuba. So you have to do with what you have. You have to make do. So one of the pieces of art that I bought is on a vinyl record, right? Because that's the only thing they had to paint on. They make jewelry out of silverware. Whatever resources they have is what they use. And that is something that makes Cubans really ingenious. So as you can see, this tub has been made into a seat. It's just so amazing to see how clever they are with their artistry. Another thing is musicians. So music is everywhere in Cuba, and you cannot walk down the street without someone saying hello to you and also having music play in the corner or maybe somebody asking you to dance with them. And so even though they live in difficult situations, they make the best out of what they have. And so for all the countries I've been to, this is by far one of the happiest places I've ever been, regardless of the fact that they struggle in other areas of their life because they make best with what they have. And like I said before, that's one of the reasons I really love to travel because it puts in perspective what you have going on in your own life. And I've really, through my years of travel, realized how miserable Americans are because we're always working, we're always trying to make more money to buy more things. And there's a lot of unhappiness that comes with that. And so to be able to see how people can live simply and happy, we have one opportunity to live in this world. And being happy and having a quality of life seems to be like the most important, which we never put an emphasis on. So, the band that you guys heard before is Buena Vista Social Club, and this is a great record if you want to learn Spanish. And I'm going to play another song in a second, but a Canadian years ago went to record some artists, and those artists didn't show up, so they found some random artist off the street and they performed, and then this record became the #1 record in the world. So it's really fascinating to listen to because it happened basically by accident, but that's how powerful the music from Cuba is. Again, I could talk for days and days and days about Cuba. Um, I highly suggest whenever you get a chance to step outside your comfort zone that you do it. It is life changing. It's unbelievable. There's 7 billion people living on this planet and everybody's having a different experience. And to go see life through somebody else's eyes, as I mentioned, is absolutely life-changing and humbling and inspiring. And when you come back to where you live, you see things with a new set of eyes. And so it's so invaluable. And that's such a gift that Spanish has given to me is that not only have I learned the language, I've had the opportunity to learn culture. I've had the opportunity to taste food, meet people from around the world, and live, the most quality life that I'm able to live. So we will end with some more music from Buena Vista Social Club. I hope you guys enjoyed our lesson on Cuba today. And que tenga buen día. Ciao.
En el barrio La Cachimba se ha formado la corredera. Allá fueron los bomberos con sus campanas, sus sirenas. Allí fueron los bomberos con sus campanas, sus sirenas. Ay, mamá, ¿qué pasó? Ay, mamá, ¿qué pasó?
El cuarto de Tula que cogió candela,
¿Cómo?
se quedó dormida y no apagó la vela.
Pobrecita tú la has cogido candela porque se quedó dormida y no apagó la vela.
El cuarto de Tula que cogió candela, se quedó dormida y no apagó la vela.
Ay, mira, llamen los bomberos, llámenlos, que aquí hay candela, que yo creo que Tula lo que quiere es que le